And now the conclusion of The Forest for the Trees. After dusk, Petrus took Wainamoinen aside. With respect, where are we going to find these weapons you promised? From a place few mortals have ever seen. Are you up for a brief jaunt? How far? We're already there. Around them, the sanctuary dissolved into impenetrable darkness. Petrus tensed at the sound of hammering, metal against metal, from somewhere deep in the forest. Over Wainamoinen's shoulder, the glow of a small, distant fire illuminated the trunks of nearby trees. Who is that? An old friend. Wainamoinen led the way through the thicket until they emerged in a clearing to find a tall, muscular man with a full, dark beard hammering a length of thin metal atop an anvil. It took a moment for Petrus to realize it was the blade of a sword. Several feet away, a fire blazed in a large stone enclosure. Two men in the background worked a massive bellows. As Petrus looked around, his gaze settled on a cache of weapons strewn about the ground and lying against trees: swords, axes, shields. You've been busy, Wainamoinen called out. The man didn't bother to look up. I was expecting you. Of course you were. Petrus turned to Wainamoinen. Who is he? The man stopped hammering and held up the sword as he approached Petrus. I was once known to your people as Ilmarinen. Petrus opened his mouth, but words failed him immediately. Then, Eternal Blacksmith, Forger of the Universe. Wainamoinen glared at him. How is it you know his name immediately, but not mine? Who can forget the craftsman of the heavens? Ilmarinen exchanged a brief glance with Wainamoinen before turning his attention to Petrus. You flatter me, mortal. Do you not fear blaspheming your Christian God? This time, Petrus could think of nothing to say. You came here for weapons, Ilmarinen continued, to fight the evil consuming your forest, destroying your crops and possessing your people. He waved a hand toward the collection around them. Yours for the taking. Thank you. But if you are Jumala, Petrus said, if you are the one true God, you could rid us of Ajattara and Perkele with a mere thought. Perkele? I have been told that he has allied himself with Ajattara, but I have only seen the attacks from the sky as proof. Wainamoinen cleared his throat. Ilmarinen merely stared at Petrus for a moment. Will you help us? What is it your Christian leaders say? God helps those who help themselves. I am giving you the tools so that you can do the work. Are you the one true God? I cannot tell you what to believe, Petrus. You must come to such conclusions on your own, for gods only have power so long as there are those who believe in them. Once people forget or deliberately turn their backs, their gods become impotent, no more than characters in a fairy tale. Before this tribulation ends, you must decide where your faith lies. Ilmarinen turned to Wainamoinen. You will accompany the mortals into battle? Yes. What say you to these rumors of Perkele's involvement with Ajattara? When it comes to the devil, nothing is what it seems. The truth will be revealed when you confront the Queen of Serpents. Then to Petrus. Mortal, collect your weapons and prepare your people for a battle that will be waged as much in their hearts and minds as in the forest. Regardless of the outcome, you and I shall meet again. With that, Ilmarinen and his forge vanished. Petrus and Wainamoinen found themselves in the center of the sanctuary, weapons scattered at their feet. Around them, people stopped and stared before cautiously approaching. As they began picking through the piles of swords, axes, and shields, some with trepidation, others with zeal, Petrus began to fear the days ahead. A disorganized, frightened mob of farmers and peasants against a legion of monsters determined to destroy God. And who leads us? A mysterious old pagan and a family of forest creatures. Have I lost my faith in Christ? Petrus stepped away from the crowd as Wainamoinen distributed the weapons. Get a feel for them tonight, but do not injure yourselves. Tomorrow I shall begin training you on basic fighting techniques. Remember, We will be combating beasts, not people. Yet, here they are, gods that had been demonized by the Christian Church, working and fighting beside us to save our lives and rid our land of the devil. Petrus longed for Ivuka at his side to tell her all that he had seen and experienced. She often put his mind at ease with thoughtful words of serene wisdom. He imagined himself speaking to her now. Could it be, my love, that Wainamoinen and these stewards of the forest were agents of Jumala, the one true God? Maybe he took the form of Ilmarinen simply as a way of communicating with me and providing these weapons. Surely he would not have brought us this far only to let us die in battle or become mindless slaves to the devil. That would make no sense, would it, Ivuka? You needed weapons to fight the devil, and God provided, Ivuka replied in his imagination. Overcome this challenge, and we shall face the rest once we are back in each other's arms. Petrus leaned against the wall of the sanctuary and peered up through the gap in the natural latticework of the arched roof. A single bright star was visible, and Petrus locked onto it, knowing that somewhere in the forest, Ivuka was under that same star and drawing nearer every minute, though she was not of her own mind. You were right, my love. We should have fled the village that night. We should have traveled south to the shores of the bay. We would still be together. I am so sorry. Yelps and shouts from the opposite corner of the sanctuary jarred Petrus from his dark musings. He looked up just in time to see a gap in the wall of the sanctuary seal itself behind an approaching gray wolf. It sauntered toward one of the fires and emerged a second later as Tuliki. Petrus pushed off the wall and made his way over to her, as did Wainamoinen, who spoke first. What news have you brought us, my dear? What of my family? Petrus chimed in. Safely escorted to one of the fishing villages, where they were welcomed as refugees from the north. Apparently news of Pericles' attacks has spread throughout the province. Any difficulties along the way? Wainamoinen said. Tuliki shook her head. Our journey was free of incident, much to the chagrin of my wolves. We were looking forward to eliminating more of the serpents. Upon leaving Petrus's family, I ventured north for a bit of reconnaissance. Ajatara and her army are moving swiftly and without rest. I estimate they will be here in 2 days. What about their numbers? About 24 Pirus and just over 200 mortals armed with crude clubs and axes. Tuliki looked around the sanctuary. Although from the looks of things you managed to gather quite a cache of weapons while I was gone. A gift from Ilmarinen. What of Perkele? Did you see him with Ajatara? We saw someone who looked and sounded like Perkele, but certainly did not conduct himself as befitting the god of thunder. He was like a callow youth, subordinating himself to her. Ajatara was clearly in charge. Wainamoinen sighed and leaned against the shaft of his spear. Do gods become weary, discouraged? To Petrus, Wainamoinen appeared to be both. That is not the Perkele I know. All of the atrocities attributed to him as of late are completely out of character. My instincts tell me that not everything is as it appears. Either Ajatara is being duped, or all of us are. The truth will reveal itself in 2 days. She ran a gentle hand along the still form of the snake, caressing the dry, brittle flesh until she touched the crusted blood surrounding the fatal wound. Ajatara lifted her hand and peered at the dull gray scales that clung to her fingertips. My children, I will see Wainamoinen lose his life for this. She shifted her gaze to the other slaughtered serpents scattered about the clearing. Her sight settled on 2 with birch trees protruding from their throats. As will the forest gods, when we burn this place to the ground. As you wish, Perkele said, standing at a respectful distance. In the meantime, we've been moving without respite for nearly 4 days. The mortals require rest and sustenance. They will not be of much use, Ajatara whirled on him. Let them eat snake. Their gazes remained locked for several seconds, one furious, the other impassive, yet neither wavering. Finally, Ajatara drew back. Soon they'll all be dead anyway. and we will lead their immortal souls into battle against the very God for whom they abandoned us. Perkele, the most powerful of us all, whose name has been reduced to a profanity by decree of this new Christian faith. Why do you care about the welfare of these insects when they turn their backs? Ajatara. She fell silent at the whispered sound of her name. Did you hear that? Perkele grabbed her by the hair and yanked her head back as he raised the blade of his axe to her throat. I heard only your incessant and redundant chiding, of which I have had more than enough. Going forward, you would do well to mind your forked tongue when speaking to me, or you might find yourself joining your late children. He lowered the weapon and released her head with a shove. Ajatara raised a hand, claws pointed toward his eyes. Don't ever threaten me. Remember, it was you who sought me out and proposed this alliance when... Ajatara. She turned away from Perkele, unfurling her tail and pushing her body to its full height. What is wrong with you? She held up a hand and closed her eyes, remaining silent for nearly a full minute. We are close to their precious sanctuary, less than a day away. How do you know that? I can hear them. Their voices carry through the trees. Yes, they mention my name and yours. They speak of Vainamoinen and someone named Petrus, but I cannot determine precisely what they're saying. It is a cacophony of voices, all talking over one another. She opened her eyes and glanced at the army of humans standing around the clearing, staring at her with vapid expressions. We keep moving. The mortals have had enough rest. They will share a final meal when we overtake the sanctuary. On that second morning, Petrus was jarred awake by the sound of Vainamoinen's voice. As he sat up, he realized that the old wizard was not speaking to him but to the entire sanctuary. Confused faces turned in every direction, searching for the source of the announcement. Petrus tilted his head toward the wall of trees beside him. Slowly he moved along the perimeter, pausing every so often to listen. The birch trees were talking, all of them. Through them, Vainamoinen revealed his plan to defeat Ajatara. No sooner had he finished speaking than two of the trees parted and Vainamoinen stepped into the sanctuary to stand beside Petrus. Well, that certainly got everyone's attention, Petrus said. I had a little help from Tapio. Speaking of which, where is our family of forest gods this morning? Out in the wild, ensuring that Ajatara is guided directly here. Well, far be it from me to question the plans of gods, but the thought of allowing the sanctuary to be invaded by the devil and her horde of giant snakes is unsettling at best. I understand. But you must have faith, Petrus. If all goes well, more than one unpleasant surprise shall befall the Queen of Serpents, and your wife will be back in your arms before the day's end. By that evening, Ajatara stared up at the walls of the sanctuary, listening to the voices of those within. Heated discussions, innocuous conversations, nervous laughter, words of hope and fear. This feels like a trap, Perkele said. Where are the forest gods? Where is Vainamoinen? Is no one keeping watch? For a god of thunder, you sound worried. What can they possibly do to stop us? Remember, find Vainamoinen first. Kill him before he has a chance to utter a word. Ajatara stretched her arms out to her sides, fingers spread wide. In response, her Purus dispersed, slithering silently away to take up positions along the front wall of the sanctuary. A small contingent of mortals formed a line behind each of the demons. Once all the columns were in place, Ajatara dropped her arms. In unison, the snakes lunged forward, jaws and tails tearing out birch trees two at a time, creating gaps in the wall. Seconds later, Ajatara's forces stormed through and abruptly stopped. The sanctuary was empty. Ajatara and Perkele exchanged puzzled glances. And yet I still hear voices, as if they were standing before us. Actually, there was only one voice speaking now, and it was Vainamoinen's. Mortals, hear me. Let my voice guide you out of the darkness. Let Ajatar's poison flow from your minds. Release it from your hearts. It's coming from the trees themselves. Perkily, burn this place. Above them, storm clouds gathered from all edges of the forest. Lightning streaked across the sky, followed by explosions of thunder. You are stronger than the mother of evil, Vainamoinen continued. All around Ajatara, the mortals began wincing and groaning. Some began hyperventilating. Follow my voice to the light. Reach out to me. Your mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers await you with arms and hearts open. They are here in the light. Crying out, the mortals dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, weeping. Perkily, why do you delay? Rain fire and lightning down on this place. He glanced up at the angry, roiling clouds and shook his head. That is not my doing. I believe we have finally awakened the old man. What do you mean? You are Perkily. You are Ukko. Who can be mightier? Perkily lowered his gaze with a smirk, his face stretching and contorting. Blue eyes darkened to black marbles, and his complexion faded to a sickly green. Ajatara glowered at him. Lempo, I thought you were long dead. The demon shrugged. You know me, old girl. I'm a survivor, and still as capricious as ever. It's been fun playing this part, but my loyalties always shift with the prevailing wind, and it seems this storm is coming for you. So fare thee well, hideous one. You bastard, I created you, I can destroy you. With a cackle, Lempo turned to flee. The lightning bolt that struck him left little more than a blackened, twisted heap. In his place stood a man bedecked in radiant golden armor. He drove his sword into the charred form of what had been Ajatara's most infamous trickster. It crumbled into a pile of ashes. No one impersonates me. Perkily's voice resonated throughout the forest. He pointed his weapon at Ajatara. You do not belong here. Your place is in Tuonela. Ajatara flicked her tail, scooping up 2 axes and tossing them into the air. She caught one in each hand and advanced on Perkily. Then bring your lightning and fire down upon me and send me there yourself. Her Pyrrhus moved in close, forming a circle around the 2 combatants. But Perkily's furious gaze remained fixed on their queen. I need no magic to defeat you, witch. As for Tuonela, I shall personally escort you. As their blades clashed, chaos erupted in the sanctuary. Now! With Petrus at his side, Vainamoinen raced toward the ring of serpents, followed by 36 farmers and tradesmen wielding weapons provided by Ilmarinen. They barreled into the snakes, slashing and stabbing. Those no longer under Ajatara's influence either scrambled to the edges of the sanctuary or retrieved their weapons and joined the fight. After felling his first demon, Petrus ducked away from the battle and peered into the throng of bodies. Ivuka! At first, there was no response. She must be here. He cried out again. Petrus! He whirled to his right just in time to see his wife slice open the belly of a green and copper beast, its forked tongue dangling from its mouth as it collapsed. Husband and wife started toward one another at a dead run. Then Ivuka was gone. Petrus stumbled to a halt, staring up at his wife screaming and struggling in the jaws of one of the largest serpents he had ever encountered. With a roar, Petrus hurled his axe toward the back of its head. Though the weapon missed its intended mark, the blade buried itself in the center of one of the diamond patterns along the snake's back. The creature hardly flinched, until 4 wolves surrounded the beast and pounced, sinking teeth and claws into its flesh. Petrus retrieved a discarded sword from the ground and charged ahead. When he reached striking distance, he leapt and plunged the blade into the thrashing mass of gray and tan. The monster whipped its head to one side, flinging Ivuka toward the sanctuary wall. The sudden motion knocked Petrus to the ground. He rolled away as the serpent followed, enervated by the wolves' relentless assault. As they disengaged, one of the wolves turned and nodded to Petrus before returning to the battle, leaving the snake to bleed out. Peering up toward the sanctuary wall, Petrus noticed Ivuka being lowered gingerly to the ground in a cradle of branches. By the time husband and wife were face to face, they were both in tears. I was caught in a tree, Ivuka said. Actually, you were caught by a tree. Tellervo winked at them from high above. Petrus smiled in spite of himself. Thank you, my friend. Ivuka leapt from the cradle into her husband's waiting arms. Petrus, I don't understand what's happening here. He placed a hand on the side of her face and kissed her. I'll just be over there, Tellervo said. Killing snakes. When their lips parted, Petrus spoke first, words tumbling out in a rush. I promise I'll explain everything when this is over. I'm so sorry I went into the forest that day with the search party. I should have stayed with you. Ivuka shook her head. Don't blame yourself. You were trying to do the right thing. You're with me now, and the devil no longer controls me. That's all that matters. I shall not leave your side. You two! Vainamoinen called. Petrus and Ivuka glanced up, just as the god thrust his sword into the eye of a black Piru. Fight now, love later. They stood, weapons at ready, but most of the creatures had already been dispatched by the mob. All eyes turned to the center of the sanctuary, where Ajitara, having lost an axe and a hand, was swinging the other wildly at Perkele. The god of thunder deftly blocked each strike. With a strident howl, Ajitara whipped her tail forward and swept his legs out from under him. Perkele crashed to the ground as Ajitara moved in for the kill, until the bloody point of a spear emerged from between her breasts. For several seconds she did not move as her breathing became labored. She arched her back and turned her face to the sky, releasing a final shrill scream before life fled her body. With eyes and mouth wide open, Ajitara dropped her axe and toppled forward, meeting Perkele's blade with her throat. Her body struck the ground a moment before her head. Perkele removed his helmet and exchanged a nod with Vainamoinen. Nice throw, brother. Ilmarinen, Petrus blurted. It cannot be. As everyone looked on, Perkele, or Ilmarinen, retrieved Ajitara's head and moved toward her body. I shall dispose of this. Vainamoinen, you and the forest gods will see to the mortals? Vainamoinen bowed his head. Just as he had arrived, the god of thunder vanished in a blinding burst of white light. By the time Petrus's vision cleared, Perkele and Ajitara were gone, along with all of her slain Pirus. In the silence that followed, those still standing exchanged wary glances. Is it over? Someone asked. The battle is won, Tapio replied, his voice resonating from every corner of the sanctuary. Ajitara has been defeated. Shoulders slumped and weapons dropped to the ground with thuds and clangs. Some cried as they embraced one another, friends and families reuniting at long last. Others wept as they knelt before the fallen. Where do we go from here? Ivuka asked. Petrus pulled her close and kissed her on the forehead, but his thoughts were beyond the forest. Now we return home to starve. At the request of the survivors, the dead had been buried at one end of the sanctuary with the help of Tapio and his family. The forest gods had shifted the earth, carving out 2 rows of individual graves, spaced evenly apart. I am deeply sorry for those you lost today, Petrus, Tellervo said, especially considering the suffering your people have endured for so long. Petrus nodded solemnly. We have won a war against an unthinkable evil, but I fear the desolation that still awaits my people. One more season without crops will make us wish we had all died swiftly in this forest. You don't honestly think we would have brought you this far only to abandon you? Vainamoinen placed a gentle hand on Ivuka's shoulder. Might I borrow your husband for a few minutes, my dear? There is someone who would like to speak with him. She flashed a bemused smile. By all means. Vainamoinen motioned for Petrus to precede him. Where are we going? Petrus asked, but the old man merely waved a gnarled hand to keep moving. As they stepped beyond the boundaries of the sanctuary, Petrus turned. Well, who wants to speak to... Oh. Both Vainamoinen and the sanctuary were gone. Once again, Petrus faced the forge of Ilmarinen. But this time, he did so alone. The eternal craftsman stood with his back to Petrus, lightly tapping on something atop a wooden table. The deity's imposing form blocked Petrus's view of the object. Without looking up, Ilmarinen spoke. I once told you that God helps those who help themselves. You and your people fought well. Come closer, Petrus. As Petrus approached, Ilmarinen stepped aside and gestured toward a gold dome about 4 feet around. The walls of the dome were perhaps 10 inches tall. The object stood on 3 legs, spaced at equal distances around the perimeter. Petrus was not certain if it glowed with its own light, or merely reflected the lambent flames of the nearby fire. What is it? It is the Sampo, a device that Wainamoinen once tricked me into creating for someone eons ago. That's a long story. But suffice it to say that once he realized the error of his ways, Wainamoinen helped me recover it. Petrus was even more confused, if that were possible. A device? What does it do? It brings prosperity to whomever possesses it. With the Sampo, you could become rich beyond your wildest desires. Gold, precious gems, dominion over man and country as far as the eye can see. Name your desire, Petrus, and it shall be yours. I wish only that this famine come to an end, that our crops thrive this coming season, and that no more of my neighbors starve to death. Petrus paused. Then, I only wish to feed my people. Ilmarinen smiled. Wainamoinen chose wisely, for you are indeed a rock, Petrus, and to you I entrust my final gift to my people. The Sampo is now yours. Take it with you. You need merely to lay your hands upon it and think about what you want most. From now on, every harvest shall be bountiful throughout the land. Your people will rebuild and become stronger than ever. I do not know how to thank you. I ask only that you never forget. My kin and I are no longer relevant in the presence of this new god whose name is spreading to nearly all corners of the world like a fire through a forest. We must accept that change is inevitable and be content to fade into the broom of antiquity. I promise that I shall never forget, Petrus assured him, nor cease believing in you. It saddens me that you're leaving us. Perhaps someday, centuries from now, all of the ancient Pathians of this earth shall return to see if your people are willing to believe in us again. As he finished speaking, Ilmarinen and his forge faded into the night. Beyond the walls of the sanctuary, Petrus turned to Wainamoinen. I didn't have the temerity to ask if he and Perkele were one and the same. Wainamoinen shrugged. Ilmarinen Perkele Ukko is not your Christian god, also known by many names? Petrus nodded. True. This experience has certainly opened my mind. Wainamoinen nodded toward the Sampo, now sitting on the ground before them, pulsing with its own inner flame. And that will open your world to even more possibilities than you ever imagined. Ilmarinen has placed great trust in you. I know you won't let him down, or your people. They look upon you as a leader now. Petrus knelt down and placed a tentative finger upon the dome's surface. It was comfortably warm to the touch. With a deep breath, he spread both hands over its dome and closed his eyes. 1 year later. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when a piercing cry tore Petrus from a restful slumber. He turned his head to glance at the empty space beside him in bed. Sitting up, he caught sight of Ivuka standing at the window, silhouetted in the pallid light of the full moon. Petrus slipped out of bed to stand behind his wife, embracing her, and their newborn daughter nestled in her arms. It will be dawn in less than an hour, Ivuka whispered, and then she will be baptized. Elisa Aniki Telero Tuliki Koivisto. Perhaps it's best not to mention Telero and Tuliki to the new minister. He might not take well to pagan names. Those will be our little secret. Like the Sampo? Petrus nodded. It's too dangerous a device to reveal. It could be made into a dreadful weapon. Ilmarinen entrusted it to me, and I shall do what I must to honor his trust. Our crops are abundant again, and our village is beginning to thrive. Let the other survivors and our new neighbors praise their God. while we praise the gods. Petrus smiled and nuzzled Ivuka. That will also be our little secret.